Hey there, Quillers. Jake Lloyd here, producer of Don't Quill the Messenger and co-founder of Dragon Wagon Radio. I just wanted to take a quick moment to tell you about my debut feature film, Pinch. Pinch is the story of two strangers brought together by the chance to own a rare and valuable sports collectible. But to do so, they're tasked with stepping out of their comfort zones and onto a baseball field. It is a story about marriage, family, how we define success, and how sometimes it's hard to look beyond our own insecurities. I made Pinch with no budget, no crew, just a ton of heart, and I am thrilled to share it with you. It's available for rent or purchase digitally on Prime Video. Visit pinchmovie.com and follow @pinchmovie on Instagram for more info on this charming little movie that means the world to me. Thank you so much for listening to Dragon Wagon Radio. I appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Don't Quill the Messenger. Cue the music. It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Hello, Quillers. Welcome back to the program. I hope you enjoy our intro music as much as I do. What you cannot see is that I do a little dance right beforehand to get myself all warmed up for each episode. Today's episode, we welcome back to the program Theresa Lauricella. She is the theater professor at Clark State College, and she's here to join us today to talk to us about what it's like to be an Oxfordian theater professor. Welcome to the program, Theresa.
Thanks, Stephen.
How was your production? Before we get into all the Oxfordian stuff, I'm just curious, how was your production of Lion in Winter this last spring?
Oh, it was wonderful. Thanks for asking.
And
it was great.
Yeah, I noticed you did that back, I think it was back in April. Is that right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And how'd your cast turn out?
It was great. We had a guest director for that. I produced it. And our guest director is Scott Stoney from Human Race Theater Company in Dayton, Ohio. And he's worked with us a couple of times, and we brought in two guest artists to play Henry and Eleanor, and then four or five students then filled in the younger roles, the sons, and then Elise. It was good. It was really good. The students really, they went for it. It was really a delight to see.
Is that a common practice for you there at Clark State, that you bring in guest artists to play certain roles and then the students play the other roles?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, you really want the students to get a good, a good opportunity, both things that they could readily be cast in right now, and then also so that they can work with people who maybe are a little bit more seasoned, more polished, so they know those practices. They see those practices before they get out into the field.
Certainly,
to the industry.
One of the best ways to learn is to watch some of the people who have more experience work alongside veterans, of course. And not only that, but it saves you on the makeup, doesn't it?
Well, certainly.
You don't have to spray gray hair into a 20-year-old college student.
I don't like doing that. It's so inauthentic. I don't like that at all. But, when you have to, you do. And sometimes it's nice for them to stretch those roles if you have to. But ideally, I really want the student that's the age appropriate to play Elise as opposed to having an 18-year-old play Eleanor. I mean, I don't think that would be a good fit.
No, it's one of those things where people talk about, like when you talk about Hamlet, for instance, and they say, oh, well, Hamlet's a college student and he needs to be 20 or 21 years old, even though the text specifically says that he's 30.
Exactly.
If you look at it, there's no way, in my opinion, that a 20-something can master that character. It's just beyond the grasp of the ability of most young actors that I've ever worked with or known. I think the writer knew that as well. I think our author knew that this had to be a character played by an older person who understood life in this grand way in order to fulfill the role.
Yeah, there's something about Hamlet. He is a student of learning. He's not stopping, and he's right. So an 18-year-old, a 20-year-old just doesn't have that all of that they've, sponged. They just don't have that. Yeah, I've seen it done with, youth. I've seen it, and it's the one good thing I will say about seeing it done with somebody who is 18, 20 years old, if that's what the director chose to do, is they've got a lot of energy. They have a lot of energy, so they can really do the antic disposition quite well.
That is
it's very exhausting for the audience,
of the role.
Of course.
It's true. It is a very important part of the role.
But it's not the only part of the role. So that's where it kind of fizzles, and then the audience is exhausted.
Yes. Well, and I think they should be. And, I had the pleasure of playing the role twice in 2 different productions in back-to-back seasons, as a matter of fact, because it took twice to get it right, quite honestly. But yeah, it is an exhaustive role. I used to say I lost 5 pounds every performance just in sweat.
That's daunting. So you did it one season. Did you know you were going to do it the next season as well?
I did not. At the time that I was doing it, I did not know that we were going to be doing it again. We made the decision to bring it back the immediate next year, quite honestly, because we were doing a best of season. So we brought back our 3 most popular shows from the first 5 years. And also because I wasn't happy with the final product and I wanted to fix the things that I felt had gone wrong with the production. So
whose idea was that? I mean, I cannot imagine as an artist, I guess I could. I guess I could see, it's just such a daunting role. I can't believe, did you not have I don't know, night terrors, going, I'm going to do this again? I mean,
I did. I found, we cut it as everybody does cut Hamlet, unless you're Kenneth Branagh. We cut it, and by the time the cutting was complete, it was somewhere around 1,150 lines remaining. And I found that right about 1,000 lines, my brain was done. It did not want to accept any more text. And I started to freak out about that, in that when I would then focus on the parts that I was having difficulty with and I would master those, I would lose parts that I had for weeks. And I was like, well, there's a max to my brain. And I have to either cut it down to 1,000 lines, or I'm going to lose this or that or the other. And I was really freaking out about it. And as a matter of fact, my best friend, who was best man at my wedding, Sharif, said to me, he was my production manager at the time. And he said to me, if it's 1,150 lines and you blow 15 of them, what's the percentage on that? 1%? 2% at the most? If you blow, 50 lines, he said, you need to stop beating yourself over the head for being 98% accurate.
Oh, good point.
And that opened the rest of my brain. And I was able to get the rest of the lines in. Now, did I ever give a 100% perfect performance? I don't know that any actor I've ever known could say that they have done that. So of course not. There's going to be a line flub here or a missed word there, or what happens a lot with Shakespearean actors is we invert words or lines when we're delivering them. That happens a lot. And you just have to,
because you're fighting the language a bit.
You just press forward. Speaking of Shakespearean productions, how often do you produce Shakespeare there at Clark State?
Shakespeare, we have done, it's going back a few years here. So off the top of my head, I'm going to say we've done 2. But that doesn't sound right. There might have been a 3rd or a 4th in there since I've been there. But then I could be also counting where I've been in another institution. So, but you know what? I was just listening to one of your podcasts a few weeks ago, and you had mentioned how you were working at a high school and you were doing Shakespeare quite regularly. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do that. So I'm going to start bringing him back more often. I think, our students are coming in for 4 shows total. We get to do a fall show and a spring show every other year. We're in a larger space. We have 2 theaters, and we have a black box, which seats at max 270 people. But when I usually do thrust or arena rather than proscenium. So I like to keep it at about 100. And we get 6 shows when we're in there. That's a lot. And for the students, it's 2 weekends. So
six performances of each production?
6 performances in that space of each production, unless we're in the bigger theater. We have a 1,500-seat proscenium, a big venue.
Sure.
And it's a big venue and gorgeous space, but we are only in there every other year. So that's usually where I put a musical. So when you think of it, I've got 4 shows for the incoming student, 2-year student. They're in, they're out. So with those 4 shows, I try to program so they get a nice, wide selection of shows. They get a musical, they get a classic, they get a comedy, and I usually do something a little avant-garde. So, why can't that classic always be a Shakespeare in those 4 years?
I don't see why not.
Right, or those 2 years. So I'm kind of taking a note from your book, and I'm gonna bring that back. I think that would be a real fun thing for me. And they learn it in the classroom, some Shakespeare in the classroom, and now they'll get to put it on its feet. So
I always found that working with students with Shakespeare was easier in a lot of ways than working with seasoned adult actors, in that the younger people don't know that it's hard, or don't know how hard it is. And so they're more receptive. They have less inhibitions about it, and fewer fears about tackling the text and really diving into their scansion. And it's very rewarding, of course, when they're like little sponges, and it's very rewarding when they have what I call those like light bulb moments, when you're explaining a scene to them or you're explaining a monologue to them, and you watch the eyes get larger and the brain engage, and they go, I get it now. I totally understand this now. And it's extremely rewarding as an educator, as well as a producer director, to see that happen with a young actor.
Absolutely. I think it's that look of dawning on their face. I think it registers so many different things. Not just I get it, but now I get why it's so good. Like, I get why people still produce this work. Like, why people talk about it, why the hype.
Absolutely.
I think that's dawning on them too. But it's funny. I was just reading Constant Pilgrim. Is that the name of it? I was just reading it the other day. And I've read it before, but I picked it up again, and I was looking at it, and I thought, my goodness, how can somebody be so good? I mean, how can somebody turn a phrase so well? In it, she's throwing her notes into the water, and water is an element that keeps coming up, and how she uses a handkerchief to wipe away her tears, and the way he talks about the brine laundering the handkerchief, and it's so cool. And when students play with, they get to read this term. They're reading they're reading Midsummer and theater history. And next term, they'll read Hamlet and script analysis. We were reading Macbeth in theater history, but I switched it up this year. And it's just fascinating. It's just so fascinating to see them play with it. And
now, will you choose one of the plays, now that you're going to get back into doing more Shakespeare there? Will you choose one of the plays to produce that you'll also then be studying in like theater history or in another class, so that there's like a cross-curricular immersion into that work?
Probably not, because I want them to be more exposed to other pieces. So the cross-curricular that I probably would do would be in the English department. So a colleague of mine is teaching Henry V. And I thought that would be really cool. I don't know, because, if I'm gonna throw these in every 2 years, I mean, I could do a history, then I can do a comedy, then I can do a tragedy. I don't have to do back-to-back genre.
Right.
And I can connect with the faculty and say, hey, what do you need? Rather than what do we want to produce?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's one of the questions I wanted to ask you on the program today.
Thanks.
Is how do your fellow faculty members react when they discover that you are an Oxfordian? Or do you keep it a closeted secret?
No, I am not closeted about it. In fact, I usually, I kind of wear it on my sleeve a bit. But Stephen, I feel like I have to come clean. I am an Oxfordian. but I'm mostly a post-Stratfordian.
Sure. Okay. I get that.
I am, and that's usually what I wear on my sleeve. Of course, they always say, well, who do you think wrote it? I think the most important part is the fact that I've digressed from the town of Stratford and the man from that town. How do they react? Some not favorably. I will say that they're not. They're certainly not favorable.
Go figure.
I exactly. I get a little bit of the I'm a crackpot kind of body language. In fact, I recently mentioned it in a faculty meeting a couple weeks ago. We were supposed to say something unique about ourselves, and I said I was a post-Stratfordian. Of course, there was some titters on one end of the room, and they're like, "What's that? What does she mean by post-Stratfordian?" And then the English faculty said, "She doesn't believe that the man from Stratford wrote the plays." And then I have a real problem with that, but it wasn't a problem. It wasn't an opportunity to argue. I don't like the word belief. When we talk about this field, I really do not like the word belief because it's not a religion for me.
Sure.
And a belief suggests religion. For me, it's knowledge. And the information that's laid out in front of me does not compute to the man from Stratford writing these works. There's a lot of information that
I'd
does
say
compute.
that it sounds like you've already scored even a minor victory in the sense that when you mentioned that you're not a Stratfordian and there were people in the room, as you said, who didn't know what you were talking about, and you said your English department colleague said she doesn't believe the man from Stratford wrote the works. The fact that they are now referring to him as the man from Stratford is one of the first steps, I think, to people making the difference, making the separation.
Well, perhaps, and I don't know if that might be my language. They may have said that William Shakespeare. I mean, I don't know. I don't recall, to be honest. Wouldn't that be lovely if that is in fact what they did say? But I will say one colleague, the colleague that's going to be teaching Henry V, she offered it to me. She said, she knows that I'm post-Stratfordian and she is not interested in the authorship. She's heard about it. She listened to something on NPR, she said, once upon a time, but you could tell she thought it was quacky. But she offered Henry V and mentioned that she was doing it. And I thought that was kind of an olive branch, to be honest, that she values that I am not anti-Shakespeare. I hate that term.
It is such a giant misconception about
the semantics on it frustrate me.
I understand, especially because those of us who are lovers of this work, and that is the reason we're seeking the truth, is because words are so important to us. And when people use words like anti-Shakespeare, you're an anti-Shakespeare person. No, and you're an anti-Stratfordian. I'm not anti anything. I'm a pro-knowledge, pro-truth person. I just think there's room for question, and we should be asking those questions, which of course is the whole mission of this program. And I think that it's important to make those very distinct acknowledgments of the language, especially when dealing with people who are opposed to asking any question about this whatsoever. I think it's great that you have a colleague who is willing to at least meet you somewhere in the middle when it comes to the work itself, and appreciate that the one thing you do share in common is a love for the work and a love for the text, regardless of who believes what about who wrote it. That's a great first step.
Yeah, right. It is a good first step. Yes.
Henry V is such a magnificent play to address some of the aspects of doubt. And when you look at how much biographical information can be gleaned from that play and how much you can tie it to things like the Essex Rebellion, for instance, and the pro-Tudor dynasty aspects of the play. And what I often do when I'm directing a Shakespeare play with actors who I'm not sure where they stand on authorship or whether they even have heard of an authorship question whatsoever is I just refer to what I know to be the basis or the underlying truth of the play as fact. And I commonly will use language such as the author was talking about this. The author was referring to that. The author is using this symbolism. The author uses this character to lampoon this real historical figure. And I don't say who the author is. I just say the author.
Exactly. You're neutral. You're approaching it from a neutrality. Yeah, I like that.
I find that the actors then accept those truths and then they raise their own questions. Well, wait a minute. How could this guy from Stratford have known all these things to put them into the play? Well, that's a really good question, isn't it? Let's explore that further.
Oh, boy.
So that's sort of my Socratic method that I'll sort of pass on to you now that you have been inspired to bring Shakespeare into the Clark curriculum.
If I'm in the rehearsal hall, it's pretty, my students know that I'm post-strat 40 and I have Oxford leanings. That's kind of how I look at it. I mean, I don't say that like a bumper sticker, but they know because I do address it in the classroom. And theater appreciation is a exercise in critical thinking. I bring it up and we do like a 2-week session on Shakespeare and we look at the evidence. And now there's all kinds of new evidence that's come, well, not new evidence, but new information that's come out recently in the New Yorker and the Atlantic that, I can just add to the fodder. So it keeps it relevant for them. I hate to say that many of the students aren't familiar with Shakespeare when I approach them about it. But I'm working with a variety of students.
You mean they're not familiar with the works? They're not familiar with the plays? When you say they're not familiar with Shakespeare, as in they did not receive any instruction in Shakespeare through their high school education?
Yes.
What's happening out there in Ohio?
I don't know. I believe it's still on the curriculum for some types of lessons, some curriculum, like the college prep curriculum. It's still on that or advanced English literature high school programs. But I can have students come from all kinds of different schools and backgrounds. So you get a nice plethora of students who have some experience and some have none. So I always survey, the first one I always ask is, has anybody read or seen Romeo and Juliet? And, out of a 100% class, I would say I might get 3 or 4 hands up.
Wow.
So I know it's pretty daunting. So not very many. And then sometimes I have some surprises, we read Julius Caesar. Oh, cool. But, it's funny because now I can pick the schools they come from. So it's almost as if I know what region of the area they're in because if they've read Julius Caesar, well, I know they came from this institution, or if they read Hamlet, they came from this institution. We have a really wonderful program in the area that has nothing to do with my college. Where the city I'm in is small, but it is very arts focused. There's a big arts community in here in this town, and we have a presenting group that actually has an education arm in it that teaches the youth the arts. It's a really wonderful program called Youth Arts Ambassadors. And those students get everything. They get all kinds of training. I mean, of course, they want to be actors and they learn that. But after they've been in the program for a while, I'm now seeing these students that are, we're talking not even high school. They're middle school into early high school. And they're going into, one's going into music direction, one's going into playwriting. They're learning these things that they probably wouldn't have learned until they got into high school or into the field, or into college in the field. And, but I taught a lesson on Hamlet, or at least Shakespeare, with this group one year. This young lady walked up to me afterwards and she said, I learned more about Hamlet in the 30 minutes with you than I did in 6 weeks or 3 weeks with my with my teacher in high school.
Wow.
And I said, what? And she says, yeah. And I did some investigation. I guess the teachers are shying away from it. Some of them, it's just not their forte. It's not something they're practiced or skilled in.
Well, that's going to be a snowball effect, won't it? It's a domino effect, a downward spiral. If young people aren't getting it in school, those young people are going to grow up to be the future teachers who then are not going to teach it, right? I mean, it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy in that sense.
Well, and I think it's a time constraint too, because I know there's people who can pick up Shakespeare and they get it like in a snap. I've had students who it just trips right out of their mouth, and I understand exactly what they're saying when they say it. But if I read it, I have to take my time with it. I just have to speak it out loud. You got a high school teacher who is up to their eyeballs in everything else. I don't know that they're going to take the time to play with it. I just don't. It's nauseating to think that could be an issue. But I don't think if they cross my field, if they cross my classroom, then they're going to get exposed to it. So I'm going to save a few of them.
Sure. One of my favorite books that I own, actually multiple copies of it and each edition of it up through modern times, is a book written by a high school theater teacher from Colorado. Her name was Catherine Ann Omni, spelled with 2 M's. It's called The Stage and the School. I believe it's like in its 12th edition now and still available for high school theater teachers to use. But the 12th edition, the edition that high school teachers can get today, is nothing like the original edition that was written in the 1920s by this high school theater teacher. It's one of the most comprehensive books on theater and drama that I have ever read. And It's a magnificent book. And the reason I bring it up is when you look at the first edition from the 20s and you look at now nearly 100 years later, the night and day difference between what high school theater teachers were teaching and what they were using as a textbook in their classrooms 100 years ago to what they're using today defines what has happened to education in our country. You're talking about a textbook back then that was a thick volume full of text, as opposed to what is today this paperback magazine looking thing that is full of nothing but pictures and images and charts and graphs and hardly any text at all anymore. And we're not requiring young people to actually read to gain their knowledge anymore. And it's a sad state of affairs just in comparing textbooks over the century.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. And that's in my classroom too. The students are, particularly my students, I'm in a community college, and I love being in a community college. My students they're greedy, they're hungry, they're gritty, but they are spread thin. Many of them have full-time jobs, or at least heavy part-time jobs. Many of them have families, and their time is limited. And, we teach them, not necessarily in my class, but one of the classes they do have to teach is how they really manage their time. We have a funding model that requires our students to be successful. And so I've had to make adjustments. And so now, I can't water down my classes. They still have to be rigorous. But what I have learned is that, granted, we don't have them read as much. And I have a lot of visuals, and I give them a lot of films to look at, clips, short. It always is short, nothing longer than 10 minutes. And even then, that's probably too much unless we're sitting there eating popcorn. But the students are taking, I use software so they can learn to take adaptive testing. And actually my success rates are pretty good, and their recall is fantastic. I mean, you would think that the only way you're going to get the info in is through reading it. Well, that's one way, certainly. But sometimes people are better listeners, or they need to watch it. They need a visual to go with the words. And because of that, and this adaptive testing software that I use, my students are actually coming to class with more to talk about.
Well, you know, when I give presentations, and I've done many presentations for many schools where I bring Shakespearean actors to the schools and we perform scenes or monologues, or just this last spring, I took a group and we did a condensed version of Romeo and Juliet for a high school. All the English classes were in attendance. And when I do that, one of the first things I say when I introduce the works to an entire auditorium or theater full of teenagers is that the works were meant to be watched. They weren't meant to be read by anyone except for scholars and the highest members of court, which, you know, is just even further proof that the man from Stratford could not have been involved in this, at least not in the writing of them. But
Truth.
I tell them that you need to see them to really appreciate them, to really understand them. And so by you bringing Shakespeare back to the theater there at Clark State, not only are you going to be immersing your immediate students in the text and in interpreting the text for performance, but hopefully it will draw other students on the campus to come and see the plays. And in many cases, maybe the first time most of them have ever seen a live Shakespearean production.
And in many cases, they've ever seen a live production at all.
Well, there is that too, isn't it? There is some truth to that.
Yeah, absolutely. There is some truth. But the bonus is that the students, they can come to a show for free. So there is no ticket cost for the kids to come see a show. If they're a student, they get to go see a show. So, I mean, I think it's kind of a no-brainer for us to do it, to bring it back. I mean, or not bring it back, but to implement it, because it's a win-win all around. The students, I can, partner with the different departments. I was even thinking I could even, if I ever attempted Hamlet, which I would love to, if I had the right Hamlet, but guest artist, I guess. But I mean, we could connect with the. I think I just came up with a season.
Fantastic! See, light bulb.
Yeah, I did.
There's a light bulb.
I
call those light bulb or lightning bolt moments.
It was a lightning bulb moment, yes. Because I could connect with the. I had a really lovely conversation with our physics teacher. And I was asking him about Ptolemy and Copernicus and yada, yada, yada.
Sure.
And because I was reading Hamlet at the time for script analysis.
Sure.
And he, in an English faculty member was like, what are you talking about? Why are you talking about this in regards to Hamlet? I was like, well, do you want an earful? And so we had a little dialogue, and he was kind of, he was rather receptive about it, and where it was coming from. And, but of course, my physics professor, he thought it was awesome. He just thought it was so neat to be able to connect his subject to Shakespeare.
I love that kind
really
of cross-curricular work. When I did teach at a high school, I commonly would try to engage not only the English department, but also the history department in many times. So like when the history department was doing Roman history, I said, well, let's connect that to Julius Caesar. Or, with you talking about Henry V, I don't know how much of, English history is taught there on the campus, but there's another potential connection. But I love the physics connection with Hamlet, because it's obvious in Hamlet that the author has come to the understanding that there is a heliocentric solar system and has now broken away from the geocentric belief. And I think that that's a brilliant aspect of Hamlet that comes out in the writing, that also proves that the writer had to have access to the latest information. Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Right.
And
I've always wanted.
There's no way that. Did you hear the doorbell?
I did.
That's our next guest coming up for our next episode. So
is it really?
Yes, it is. And so if our Quillers are paying attention, then they'll know that they need to download all of our episodes and listen to them all so that they can hear each and every guest and all of the fun and important information that we have to share on each episode. But back to the geocentric, heliocentric thing, that was happening during the life of these works being written. And only the top of the top would have had access to that information and the lectures and the literature that was being produced at the time with regards to that information.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that alone is sort of, mind blowing to see that. I mean, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Do you remember those images? They were really popular in the 80s. They're like these geometric images, and they had them in like novelty stores, and you could see the image or not. Sure. And then if you stare at them long enough, they would emerge.
There'd be like a dot maybe in the middle that you had to focus on for a little while.
Or like a whale or there was like you had to focus on it. And that's sort of how I see this. You can look at, it gets so frustrating to see how people are like, the evidence is clear. It is the man from Stratford. Well, it's really not clear. It's interpretive. You're looking at it this one way and you're seeing this one thing.
Absolutely.
And yet if you look at it regarding Hamlet, once you see that connection between the cosmos. I mean, he's looking at the entire universe in that one play. And I mean, when I say universe, I mean the solar system, but goodness, it's just, you can't unsee it anymore. It's in like all the lines. I mean, well, it's not in all the lines, but it's in such a good amount of them throughout, from, beginning to end.
It's a
theme that runs through.
I used to teach groups of charter school and homeschool kids for a number of years. And one of the classes that I taught at the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles. And I called it Shakespeare and the Stars. And we went through, we would go through all of the astronomical references that are made throughout the text and throughout the canon. And I believe that you can date some of the plays based on those references. For instance, when you look at one of my favorite ones is A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Hermia is talking about Lysander having changed his love for her. And she says, I would soon rather believe that a hole had been bored in the earth so that the sun and the moon could look at each other through that hole. I'm paraphrasing, but basically that connotes a geocentric belief system. Now, the argument could be made, well, the author knew that in ancient Greece, that's what they would have believed. Or the argument can be made that the play was written before the author was exposed to this new idea that the sun was actually the center and not the earth. And so you can predate A Midsummer Night's Dream long before Hamlet because of that information and that difference in the way the text is written.
Right.
And I think that might be a great way to bring in, scientists are much more open to the authorship question because, P.S., they're scientists and they understand the test of theory and fact and truth a lot better than a lot of passionate literature professors often can or will open their minds.
Right. I think it's the scientific method.
Absolutely.
I think it has something to do with that. And I'm really analytical. Like, my superpower is analyzing a script. You put one in front of me and in about 30 minutes, I have it broken down. I wish I could write them as well as I can break them down. But I've never actually attempted, I probably have attempted to write a play, but that's just not my bag. I like to analyze them. And I'm really, really good at it. And I look at it like a blueprint. And when I look at it so, I don't know, probably, I guess, looking at it like that and taking out all the emotion of it and just looking at how it moves and how it tracks, you can see things that you can see the forest for the trees and you can actually see the trees for the forest. that I think that, I don't know. I think that that's how a scientist would look at it.
It's exactly how they look at it. And you're right. The scientific method.
It's a very cold method. It's a very cold method. But I mean, you can always add in the other elements. But I think that, scientific method.
And I don't ask people to be dispassionate about the works of Shakespeare. I think that's impossible. I don't know that you can love it.
No.
They're connected.
I'm a human.
But
I'm a human. So even though I can see it like that and I can see it very coldly, there's that moment where I get drawn away, as I said earlier when I was talking about, the Constant Pilgrim, as the way he describes the way a tear is streaming down the youth's cheek. And it's just, you get pulled away for a second and then you have to go back to it because I'm a human. It's beautiful. I mean, it's moving. And even if, you can't help it.
How do your students respond to the authorship question when you get into that portion of the curriculum in your class?
I would say that 99% of them are pissed. Yeah, I'm sorry. I have to use that word because they're angry.
That's a perfectly acceptable word in podcasting. Thank
you. They are angry. They're angry in many different ways. But you know what? The thing is, I'm not trying to get them to convert. I am not trying to get them to drink any Kool-Aid. I don't offer any kind of, I mentioned the declaration of doubt, but I do not require they sign it. I just know that I let them know that it's there. I'm not trying to get them to convert. I am not a crusader.
What is it that they get most angry about, especially if many of them have had very little exposure to Shakespeare? What is it that causes them to become so visceral about it?
That it's not considered a legitimate field of study.
They're upset. They're upset that it's not considered a legitimate field of study?
Yeah.
Okay, so they're angry in the sense of, nobody told me this. Why was I deceived? And why are we not allowed to question this and look into this?
Yes, that is exactly right.
That's excellent. That's great. You're breeding free thinkers there at Clark State.
That's the attempt. That is the attempt. So, yeah, that's what makes them upset. And then, what'll happen is they will mention it in an English class.
And then they get tarred and feathered and sent out of the room and 10 demerits and rulers across the knuckles.
Yes. But they don't give up.
Good. That's great. Good.
They don't give up. And I hope I'm not harming any of them in their careers by telling them, this information, giving them this information. Don't tell them, I show it to them. I have, honestly, Stephen, I have kind of I feel a little nervous when I address it because I really want them to know it and I want to share it because I'm very passionate about it. But I know that they're going to lean. I know they're going to lean into it. It's exciting. It stirs up they've heard about the name before, whether they've heard the stories or they might be surprised that they actually know, because that's one of the areas I do drive them through is, hey, you really know Shakespeare, even if you've never watched Romeo and Juliet or read Julius Caesar. You've actually witnessed Shakespeare because it's reproduced. Many of them know West Side Story, or they know 10 Things I Hate About You, or
of course,
various play or movies that have been interpreted or adapted from Shakespeare. So they know it and they're like, that's cool. And then they're more receptive to go along this little path. And we go through so many different, we go through such a trajectory. They do their own research online. They read information on Stratford. They read information on Oxford. They read information that's just neutral. That's, it's post-Stratfordian information. And at the end of it, they really do lean in. They find it more exciting. It kind of shakes the dust off Shakespeare.
That's an argument I've been making for a long time, and it's an argument that I make to fellow producers of theater and artistic directors, especially those who focus on the classics or particularly Shakespeare festivals or Shakespeare companies. I say,
Yes.
when you embrace this and you introduce it to your audience, it's going to open the world of the plays to your audience in a whole new way. It makes Shakespeare new again for a lot of people, because now they look at it through a different lens and they start to see the autobiographical information in the plays. They start to see the references to the historical characters. They understand Malvolio as Christopher Hatton. They understand that.
They understand the history.
Yeah, absolutely.
They understand the history of the time period. I mean, that's what theater history is about, is learning the culture of the period. I mean, we can talk about the culture. We can say, hey, if you look at the Greeks and you look at their vase paintings and this and that, but it's when you get into their actual plays, do you understand the way that their humanity, the way that they communicated with one another. The same thing too with Elizabethan England. I mean, we can read, court documents till the cows come home, but when you actually read Shakespeare, do you understand how court life really worked? And then you look back at the historical documents and say, hey, there's a correlation. Wait a minute. There's a correlation. How's that possible if he's a glovemaker's son? It doesn't add up.
That's exactly right. And I think that young people, it might actually serve to your benefit that a lot of your students don't have these preconceived notions and haven't been indoctrinated with, go to Stratford-on-Avon and see Shakespeare Land. And that might be what's helping to keep their minds open.
Maybe.
I am curious to know, though, when they do show up in that English class across the campus and they bring it up to their English professor, have you had any of your colleagues come to you and say, would you please stop telling these students this? We don't want to deal with this in our classroom. Have you had any backlash of that nature?
I have not had any backlash. And I think the reason is because when a student comes to you with information, with knowledge, it's pretty thrilling. I mean, this whole started for me because a student came to me and said, hey, I want to do Shakespeare for my project, but the biography is really scant, and can I dabble in this authorship thing? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And that started it for me, was because a student wanted to learn something. And I think that's sort of the thing,
That's
they
a magnificent story.
Scholar.
That's that, mentor, teacher, who's the teacher, who's the pupil story. That's a magnificent story.
Oh, well, that's true. Who is the teacher? Who is the pupil? I mean, that's absolutely true. I learned so much from my students daily. Teaching is difficult. It is hard. But it can be really rewarding.
Amen to that.
And I walk in the door and and that's the part that's always the struggle, is to express to them that I'm going to facilitate this. I'm going to facilitate your learning. I'm going to guide you, but your voice is really important. And that's what comes up. And so that's what happens is I facilitate by giving them information on the authorship. And then they fill in those blanks. I mean, I can't cover everything because we only have a couple weeks to do it. They start filling in those blanks, and then they take it outside of my classroom. And that I find to be kind of cool. I find it to be really cool. But I also, I don't really want them to drink the Kool-Aid, but I think it's inevitable when they see the forest for the trees. I think that's inevitable.
Absolutely.
They're going to. Not all of them will. I mean, it's the ones that really care. I mean, the ones that are like really jazzed about it. And that's the ones that really go back to the classroom.
Well,
and
I think
things.
we've all come across people who have shown an interest in this, and then we share some information with them, and you get a variety of different responses on a bell curve. There are the people who are like, I don't want to talk about that. I know what I know. And then there are people who go, well, that's really interesting, but I really don't care. And then there's everything in between, and I think that that's just part of it. If you can at least open the door, I don't tell people you need to be an Oxfordian. I tell people,
No.
you have to look at this with an analytical mind and not allow what you've been told in the past to sway your decision, and not let your passionate belief in the godlike nature of your high school English professor who you loved so much, and let go of all of that and just examine. And most people, if they do that, they will then come upon their own truth. They will find their own truth.
And that's the thing. That's exactly what I provide them. And that when hearing you say it makes me feel a little bit more at ease by what I'm attempting to do, because, but when they see that there's such limited information, then I think that I always feel so guilty, because I'm sorry, I can't give you more about the man from Stratford. That's it. That's all there is. Good luck. I mean, there's lots of books out there, but I mean, they just say the same thing.
They do.
Over and over and over again.
What if? There are a lot of what if. There are a lot of choose your own adventure books about the man from Stratford. That's what I like to call them.
Yeah.
If you want to believe this, turn to page 32. If you want to believe that, turn to page 54. If you want to believe he was caught poaching deer, turn to page 93.
And I think they can hear the vitriol from the current Stratfordians that are really holding on to their belief. They can hear it. I mean, I don't have to teach them to hear the negative. They're getting it on their own. I was just talking to a colleague about something about that, and I read her a passage, and that really bothered me. And she heard it, and she's totally doesn't care too much one way or another. So I don't think they're doing themselves much service. And I think if my students are catching it, it's laced with a lot of negativity.
Well, this young generation, the millennial generation, I guess the students that you're dealing with are technically the next, what are they, Z? I don't know what I think Generation Z they're called, behind the millennials.
Yeah, I have a little bit of everything, because we have a lot of alternative.
They get a lot of flack, and they get a lot of criticism. And a lot of it, I believe, is warranted. And I'm one of the people who delivers some of that criticism, because I deal with them regularly, especially a lot of young actors. However, the one thing that you can find and will find and continues to be prevalent is, you're right, they don't react well to that kind of negative. And they don't like being told what to believe. That's right. And they see these staunch Stratfordians as pseudo-fascists in a certain sort of way. Yes, they do. And they will stand up to that. They will say, wait a minute, that you sound like a fascist, and I don't want to believe what you're force-feeding me to believe, big brother. I don't know how many of them have read Orwell. By the way, another pseudonym. George Orwell, right? Which is just another way to like point out to some of them. Yeah, look at all of these pseudonymous. I can never say that word correctly. Pseudonymous. Anyway, that word. Writers using a pseudonym. Writers. There. Yes. But then I just Porky Pigged my way through that in a horrible way. But if you point out to them people like Orwell, like obviously Twain, then that also kind of sets off a light bulb in their heads, when they go, wow, I didn't realize. But you're right. They are willing to stand up to that kind of force feeding. And the Stratfordians are on their way to their own demise when they continue to dictate that way, including I've heard of English professors who have forbidden this topic from being discussed in their classrooms. And I understand, and I know there are some people within the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship who can cite the reference for this. So I don't mind saying it on the air. And I understand that James Shapiro has been placed on record as threatening to fail students in his class for bringing it up or for broaching the topic in their writings or in their research.
I don't understand why someone would do that.
Fear.
I cannot I mean, I cannot, as an educator, I cannot imagine telling a student, no, you cannot research something. No, you can't go that way. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of topics I don't want to hear about. I mean, there's many I don't really want to know about. They're just not my bag. But I want to hear the student's voice. So maybe I don't want to hear about XYZ, but I want to hear XYZ from that student's voice. You know what I mean? That I might learn something about something I don't even want to know anything about because the student just told me about it. So I can't, that's a different kind of educator, and that's not the educator I am.
Absolutely not.
And
why would you stifle
that those folks say that?
Why would you stifle inquiry in a student? If they're passionate about something and they go and delve into that and they learn about that hopefully fosters a passion in another topic and another topic and
another topic and another topic. And then the light bulb goes off, like you said. And I don't think my students are going to be all theater professionals by all means, but you open up a doorway on the Shakespeare authorship, and then that student may go on and be a scientist and learn how to look at things from a different angle, to learn to look at things through a different side of the prism. And they are more successful as a result. I mean, that's how I see it. Like I said, I don't need them to drink any Kool-Aid, but I just want them to manipulate in that world and look at the evidence and look at it from a different angle.
It's one of the ways that we get children interested in reading. We find a topic they're interested in. We give them a book about that topic. They read that book. I know that. And now they go, maybe I'd like to read another book about something different. And to say let's say a child goes, I want to read about unicorns. Well, unicorns didn't exist. Well, but I want to read about you. No, they didn't exist. Choose something else to read about. That's exactly. You just shut them down.
You just shut them down. Yeah, you just shut them down. How could a student sit in that class and go, you don't want me to look at something? This area of this topic is barred from me? How there's a wall there.
At the very minimum, let the student examine why unicorns exist in legend then, if that's the case. Yeah. Where did they come from? What are their origins? How do we know for a fact they didn't ever exist? Why did somebody write about them in the first place then? Except that the problem with Stratfordians is, using that same unicorn analogy, is they know that there's proof of unicorns, and that's what scares them. And that's why they don't want people investigating this. That's why they don't want to discuss it, is because there are so many holes in the fabric, the cloth of the cloak that they're wearing, that, it's tantamount to the emperor himself.
Right.
They're naked and they don't want to be told so.
Right. I just find it interesting that they keep dialoguing about it. Like you are right. If they know that the unicorn exists, and so they keep addressing it, it doesn't exist. They keep saying it doesn't exist.
Right. There's nothing to see
because
here.
They know that it does. Them even coming forward and say it doesn't exist suggests they're frightened.
Well, you keep fighting the good fight out there at Clark State in Ohio. I'm so thrilled that I could have been even a small part of inspiring you to
no, it was a great idea.
Do Shakespeare
I'm so
and now some other revelations that occurred just here on the recording of this episode. I look forward to hearing about your coming production of Henry V, because it sounds like that's where you're about to go. And
no, we'll see.
That's a big production. So if you need any help from this side of the country, let me know. I'll do whatever I can.
Thanks.
And, hopefully, obviously, the key to Henry V is basically the same key to Hamlet. It's the same key to a lot of the major plays, and that is you got to find the right Henry V. But it sounds like you have the ability to bring in a guest artist if necessary. Some of the productions, for instance, you don't do a Hamlet if you don't have a Hamlet. You don't do a Lear if you don't have a Lear. You don't do an Othello if you don't have an Othello.
Lear. That was the third one. We did Lear.
Wow.
Yeah, we did Lear a couple years ago.
I always tell people that I'm memorizing Lear now so that by the time I'm old enough to play Lear, it'll all be there, because I know I won't be able to memorize it at that point in life. The older you get, the harder the lines. People tell me that, and I've worked with older actors who have told me that all my life, and it's not until now at this point in my life when I've started to discover how true it is, and I hate them for it. Really do. I'm like, oh, why were they so right? I just finished a production of Henry IV where we combined parts 1 and 2 together, and even the line load of that wasn't even that tremendous. Henry IV is not really in that many scenes in either of those plays. It's really the Hal and Falstaff show. But when Henry speaks, he speaks for pages at a time. And my God, I thought my brain was going to explode trying to learn all of that.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
yeah, especially the scene right before he dies, for instance, it's longer than any speech that Hamlet has by far. And Prince Hal has one line to break it up in the middle of like 3 pages of monologue. And the young actor who was playing my Prince Hal, the young William Holbrook, grandson of Hal Holbrook, he would encourage me. He's all of 21, and he's like, the lines come to him like lightning, and he's like, you'll get it. I know you'll get it.
Oh.
Well,
that's good stuff.
Thanks for joining us,
really
Theresa. It's been a magnificent episode. It's been so fun to talk to you, and glad to have you back here on the program. I'll look forward to hearing about your Henry V adventure and what you have on your plate coming up. I hope to see you at our conference in Hartford later on in the year.
Indeed. Yeah.
And we'll catch up then.
Okay. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, find our other episodes on your favorite podcast download provider. And would you give us a rate and review? We'd love to see ourselves up near the top. Just go in, type in, tell us how wonderful we are. Or if you listen to one of our previous episodes where we brought on some comments from some of our listeners, send us an email, send us a message, tell us what you think. We take all responses, even you hateful Stratfordians. We'll listen, and we'll share some of those comments on the air on a future episode as well. Don't forget that Don't Quill the Messenger is brought to you by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. You can learn more about the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship at their website, shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org, your source and resource for everything you need to know about the Shakespeare Authorship Question. I'm your host, Stephen Sable. Keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.